The morning Callum Ashford almost walked past the boy who would change his life. It was raining in Vancouver. Not the soft Pacific drizzle that locals called rain and visitors called something close to mist. This was a proper November downpour, the kind that came sideways off Burrard Inlet and found the gap between your collar and your neck no matter what you wore. Callum had his umbrella up and his head down, moving at the pace of a man who had somewhere important to be and had already calculated to the minute exactly how long it would take him to get there. He was 53 years old, and he had not been late for a meeting in 11 years. The boy was crouched beside the revolving door of the Meridian Center, pressed into the narrow overhang above the entrance, knees pulled to his chest. He was perhaps 10, perhaps 11, thin the way children get when they have not been eating properly, wearing a jacket that had been good once, maybe 2 winters ago, before it was washed too many times and the zipper broke. He had a small backpack, dark blue, with a cartoon rocket on it that seemed from another era of his life entirely. He was not begging. He was not holding a sign. He was simply there, watching the revolving door turn, watching people go in and out, watching them not see him. Callum almost didn't see him either. He had his badge in his hand, the security badge, that opened the executive entrance on the left, and he was thinking about the Haverford account. He was thinking about the quarterly projections that Davies had sent over at 11 the night before. He was thinking about the fact that his coffee had gone cold in the back seat of the car because traffic on the Granville Bridge had been worse than usual, and Sanjay had taken Marine Drive instead without asking, which added 4 minutes Callum did not have. He was not thinking about a boy in a broken jacket pressed against the outside of his building. And yet, something made him stop. He couldn't have said what it was. Not the boy's face, because Callum had not yet looked at his face. Not a sound, because the boy had made none. Perhaps it was something his body registered before his mind caught up, the specific shape of a child alone, in the rain, in a place where children were never alone. Callum stopped walking. He turned. The boy looked up at him. His eyes were dark brown, serious, older than his age, in the way that sometimes happened with children who had seen too much too quickly. There was a bruise going yellow along his left cheekbone. His hair was wet and plastered to his forehead. He did not look frightened exactly. He looked like a person who had been frightened so many times that the feeling had become something he simply carried, like weight. "You work here," the boy said. "I do," Callum said. "My mom's in there," the boy said. "She's been in there since yesterday." Callum looked at the revolving door and then back at the boy. "In the building, the clinic," the boy said, "on the 3rd floor. They wouldn't let me in because I'm not 18. The lady at the desk said I had to wait outside." Callum looked at the overhang above the boy's head. It was perhaps 18 inches wide. The rain was reaching him anyway, had been reaching him probably for a long time. The boy's jeans were wet from the knee down. "How long have you been out here?" Callum said. The boy looked at his watch. It was a child's watch, plastic blue, with a cracked face. "Since 7:15, he said. It was now 8:47. Callum stood there for a moment, and something shifted in his chest. Something he could not have named and would not have tried to name, not then. He was a practical man. He believed in practical responses. "Come inside," he said. His name was Eli. Eli Brennan, age 11, from East Vancouver by way of a place he called the apartment on Kingsway. That he said this the way you say the name of a place you have already half decided you are not going back to. He told Callum this in the lobby, sitting on the edge of a chair in the waiting area near the security desk, still dripping slightly onto the polished floor, his backpack on his knees like a shield. The receptionist, a young woman named Jade, who had worked the morning desk for 2 years, watched them with an expression she was trying very hard to make neutral. "His mother is in the clinic," Callum told her. "3rd floor. Can someone check on her status and let the boy know she's all right?" "Sir, clinic information. He's been outside since 7:15, Callum said. "In the rain." Jade looked at Eli. Eli looked back at her with those old patient eyes. She picked up the phone. While she made the call, Callum sat down across from Eli. He was aware that he was now 22 minutes behind schedule and that his assistant, Priyanka, would be managing the Haverford people in the 4th floor boardroom with the careful efficiency she always brought to situations she had not been warned about. Priyanka was excellent. The Haverford people would survive 22 minutes. "What's your mother's name?" he asked. "Sable," Eli said. Sable Brennan. And she was sick. Ellie nodded. She's been coughing a lot. For a while. She tried not to let me hear it, but our apartment. He stopped. It was small, he said carefully. You could hear everything. Callum noticed the past tense. He did not say anything about it. Do you have other family in Vancouver? He asked. Someone we can call? Ellie shook his head. We moved here in August, he said. From Thunder Bay. My mom had a job lined up, but he pressed his lips together. It didn't work out, he said. The company was smaller than they said it would be. They let her go after 6 weeks. I see. She kept applying, Eli said quickly, as though it were important that Callum understand this. Every day. She showed me. She had a spreadsheet. The word hit Callum somewhere unexpected. A spreadsheet. A woman sick enough to end up in a walk-in clinic, new to a city that had not been kind to her, and she had kept a spreadsheet. She sounds like a determined person, Callum said. She's the most determined person I know, Eli said, without hesitation, without performance, simply as a statement of fact. Jade came back from the phone. Miss Brennan is currently with a doctor, she said. She's been admitted to the clinic for observation. They're saying she'll be there at least through the morning. Ellie's jaw tightened. Not panic. He was too accustomed to managing his responses for panic, but something moved through him quickly and was then contained. He nodded once. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay, the way you said okay when you had run out of alternatives. You can't wait outside, Callum said. You'll come up with me. Eli looked at him. I don't know you, he said. It was not accusatory. It was simply accurate. My name is Callum Ashford, Callum said. I own this building. My office is on the 7th floor. You can sit in the reception area outside my office and someone will bring you breakfast, and you will be warm and dry, and we will get information about your mother as soon as there is any information to get. Ellie considered this. He had the particular gravity of a child who has learned to evaluate situations carefully, because the consequences of misjudging them fall entirely on him. You own the building? He said. I own the company that owns the building, Callum said. Close enough. Eli thought about it for another moment. Then he stood up, picked up his backpack and said, Okay, thank you. Such a small phrase for such a careful child to offer. By 9:30, Eli was sitting in the chair outside Priyanka's desk, eating a toasted bagel with cream cheese and a bowl of sliced fruit that Priyanka had assembled with the same quiet efficiency she applied to everything. He had his backpack on the chair beside him. He was doing something on a folded piece of paper with a pencil, working through what looked like long division, a whole column of it, self-assigned, in the middle of a morning when his entire world was suspended somewhere on the 3rd floor below him. Priyanka appeared in the doorway of Callum's office. The Haverford call has been rescheduled to 11, she said. Davies can conference in. Is there anything else you need? Callum was looking at Eli through the glass. Can you find out if there's a social worker assigned to the clinic, he said, and whether anyone has been in contact with the boy's school about his absence? Priyanka looked at Eli, then back at Callum. 11 years they had worked together, and she had a gift for reading the difference between Callum Ashford acting on instinct and Callum Ashford acting on policy. She could tell which one this was. Of course, she said, and find out who handles intake at the emergency family housing on Canby, he said. I want a name. Priyanka wrote it down without comment. At 9:50, the clinic called up to report that Sable Brennan had pneumonia. Advanced, the nurse said. The kind that had probably been developing for weeks while her body tried to outrun it and couldn't. She would need to be admitted to St. Paul's. They were arranging a transfer. Callum took the call himself and relayed the information to Eli in the chair outside. Eli set down his pencil. He did not cry. He looked at the wall for a moment, very still, and then he looked at Callum and said, Can I see her before they move her? I'll go with you, Callum said. The clinic occupied the 3rd floor of the building, a community health center that Ashford Properties had subsidized the rent on for 9 years, since the previous location on Hastings had been redeveloped and the organization had nowhere to go. Callum had agreed to the reduced rate arrangement because it was good for the company's community relations portfolio. That had been his reason, written down in the agreement spelled out in the board meeting. He had not thought much about it since. He thought about it now, walking through the clinic's reception area, Eli beside him, the boy's hand not in his. Eli had not reached for his hand, was too self-contained for that, but near his, close, the way a child moves when they are frightened and will not say so. Sable Brennan was propped up on a narrow bed behind a pale green curtain, an oxygen line under her nose, her eyes closed. She was 36 years old, and she looked at this moment both younger than that and much older. She had Eli's dark coloring and a line between her brows that had been there long enough to be permanent. On the bedside table, a library book, face down, a water bottle with a sticker of a hummingbird on it, a phone with a cracked screen. She opened her eyes when she heard Eli's footstep. "Hey, Bug," she said. Her voice was rough, scraped thin. "Hi, Mom." Eli sat on the edge of the bed, and she put her hand on his back immediately, automatically, the way mothers do when they need to make sure their child is really there. "I told you to go to school," she said. "I know, Ellie. You were inside and they wouldn't let me in, and I didn't have anywhere to go," he said. Not an accusation, just the plain shape of it. Sable Brennan closed her eyes again. Something passed over her face, a particular grief that Callum recognized without being able to name. The grief of a parent who understands, for the first time, what their child has been carrying without telling them. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she whispered. "Don't be," Eli said. "You're going to be okay. They're taking you to the hospital." "I know. I'll come as soon as they let me in," he said. "I'll be right there." Callum stood at the edge of the curtain, watching them, and he felt something he had not expected to feel in his own building at 9:55 on a Tuesday morning. He felt like an intruder, not because he was unwanted, but because what he was witnessing was private and whole and complete without him, a love so specific and so particular to two people that it needed no audience. He stepped back. He waited. After a few minutes, Eli came out from behind the curtain. His eyes were dry, but his face had changed in the way faces change when you have been somewhere private and then return to the world. "She told me to thank you," he said to Callum. "She doesn't need to thank me. She will anyway," Eli said. "She's like that." The question of where Eli would go while his mother was at St. Paul's was one that Callum had not anticipated needing to solve, and yet here it was, presenting itself with the calm inevitability of all the problems he had not anticipated. The school. Eli attended Grandview Elementary. It turned out, a 12-minute walk from the apartment on Kingsway, could provide supervision during school hours. Priyanka had called. After school was different. After school, there was no one. The apartment on Kingsway, it also turned out, was more complicated than Eli had let on. The landlord had been paid through October. It was now the 18th of November. Sable Brennan had been managing, in the way people manage when they are trying very hard, and things keep going sideways, paying small amounts, promising larger ones, working out arrangements that held until they didn't. The building manager had called that morning, while Eli was outside in the rain. He had left a message on the cracked screen phone about what happened next. Priyanka found this out from the clinic's social worker, whose name was Bernadette Osei, and who had seen many versions of this situation and spoke about it with the measured compassion of someone who has learned to be useful rather than emotional. "There are placement options," Bernadette told Callum in the hallway outside the clinic, while Eli sat inside eating the second half of his bagel. "Temporary foster care while Miss Brennan is in hospital. It's a stable system. He'd be looked after." Callum looked through the window at Eli, who was now reading the library book from his mother's bedside table, his lips moving slightly over the harder words. "What does he want?" Callum said. Bernadette blinked. It was not the question she had expected. "He's 11, she said. "We don't typically. He's 11 and he's been outside since 7:15 managing a crisis entirely by himself," Callum said. "What does he want?" Bernadette considered this. "He said he wants to stay somewhere near the hospital," she said, "so he can visit her." "Then we find him that," Callum said. What happened next did not happen the way these things happen in stories, in a single, clean gesture, a billionaire writing a check and solving everything in one afternoon. It happened the way things actually happen. Slowly, with complications, with phone calls that went to voicemail, and forms that required a notary and a system that had rules designed to protect people, that sometimes, in practice, made it harder to help them. Callum Ashford had not navigated a bureaucracy in decades. He had people who navigated bureaucracies on his behalf. But his people were not here, in this hallway, with this particular problem. He was. So he made calls himself. He sat in the clinic waiting room, the one with the plastic chairs and the rack of health pamphlets and the fish tank with the slightly too green water, and he made calls with the same focus he brought to everything, identifying the right person in each system, asking the question that got him to the next person, not accepting that's not how it works as an ending when there was always a "but here's what might work instead" somewhere in the same sentence. It took 4 hours. By 3 in the afternoon, Eli had a placement confirmed at a respite home 6 blocks from St. Paul's Hospital, a small row house run by a woman named Val, who had been doing temporary care for 15 years and who, when Callum called, said, "Bring him over, whenever. I've got a room and there's leftover stew," with the ease of someone who had stopped being surprised by the timing of need. By 3:30, Callum had also done something he had not planned to do and could not entirely explain to himself. He had called the superintendent at Grandview Elementary and arranged for Eli to receive tutoring through the absence so he didn't fall behind. He had called his own company's legal team and asked them to send someone to help Sable Brennan understand her tenant rights before the landlord's message could become an eviction. He had called Bernadette Osei back and asked her to tell him what the single biggest gap was in the support system for families in exactly this situation. Newly arrived in the city, one parent, between jobs, sick. Because he wanted to understand the shape of the problem, not just the one instance of it in front of him. Bernadette had paused for a long moment on the phone. "Housing," she said finally. "It's always housing. There aren't enough transitional units for families. Women, especially women with children. They fall into the gap between emergency shelters and permanent housing, and they can stay in that gap for months." Callum wrote it down. He had always been better at problems he could see the edges of. Eli visited his mother that evening. Val drove him. Callum knew because Priyanka had arranged for a car to be available, and then Val had said cheerfully that she had a perfectly good car of her own and could manage, "Thank you." But she'd take the parking voucher if he was offering. Callum sat in his office as the building emptied around him, the Vancouver evening going blue and then dark outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and he thought about Eli's face when he'd asked, in the lobby, "You work here?" "Not. Help me." "Not. I have nowhere to go. Just, do you work here?" A factual question. An opening. He thought about the spreadsheet. Sable Brennan, sick and scared and new to this city, maintaining a spreadsheet of job applications because you keep doing the thing you can do, even when the thing you can't control is happening around you. He thought about the library book on the bedside table. He thought about Eli outside in the rain, doing long division on a folded piece of paper, because he was the kind of child who needed something to do with his hands when he was frightened. Callum Ashford had built his company over 26 years, from a single commercial property in Kitsilano to a portfolio that included 17 buildings across British Columbia and Alberta. He had done this through attention and patience and an absolute refusal to let the perfect become the enemy of the functional. He did not make large gestures, he made decisions, and he followed them. He made one now. He called his director of corporate giving, a quiet and precise man named Tom Haskell, who answered on the second ring, despite it being nearly 7 in the evening. "Tom," he said, "I want to talk about our community housing initiative. The annual allocation is already set for this." "I know," Callum said. "I want to talk about making it structural, a dedicated fund. Multi-year, focused on transitional family housing, specifically single-parent households in employment transition. I want to understand what it would take to actually move the needle on vacancy in that category." Tom was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant shift," he said. "It is," Callum said. "Can I ask what prompted?" "Yes," Callum said. "I met someone today. I'll explain tomorrow. For now, I just want to know if it's feasible." Tom said he would look into it and call back in the morning. 3 weeks later, Sable Brennan was discharged from St. Paul's with medication, a follow-up schedule, and a referral to a pulmonary specialist. She had lost 11 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, and she walked with the careful deliberateness of someone who has been reminded that her body requires maintenance she cannot skip. Eli was waiting outside the hospital with Val, who had brought a thermos of tea and a folding lawn chair for herself, because, she said, she had learned never to stand around waiting when you could sit around waiting. Callum was not there. This was intentional. What Sable Brennan needed, walking out of that hospital, was her son and the woman who had looked after him for 3 weeks with leftover stew and no drama. She did not need a stranger who owned commercial real estate, however well-intentioned. He had, however, arranged a few things in advance. The legal team had negotiated with the Kingsway landlord. The outcome was not perfect. Sable would need to find a new place by January. But she would not be paying November's back rent, and she would have time. Time was the thing. Bernadette had connected her with a housing advocate who knew the transitional unit waitlists better than anyone in the city and had already flagged 2 properties that were coming open in December. And there was a job, not a favor job, not a charity position, a genuine role, contract to start, in the records management division of Ashford Properties, because Priyanka had reviewed Sable Brennan's resume. Callum had asked. Bernadette had facilitated and said flatly, "She's overqualified for this, but it gets her in the door, and the supervisor in records is a reasonable person who will recognize what she's got." Priyanka had an instinct for talent that Callum had learned, years and years ago, to trust entirely. Sable Brennan did not know about the job yet. She would receive a call from the HR department in the normal way, on a normal Tuesday, and she would apply, and she would be offered the position on her own merits, because she was, as her spreadsheet had quietly argued, a capable person who had run into a sequence of bad timing, and a city that did not slow down for newcomers. Callum believed it was important that she know this was her own merit doing the work. He had been on the receiving end of help that felt like charity once, a long time ago, early in his career, and he still remembered the particular flavor of it, the gratitude you weren't sure you were allowed to feel without also feeling diminished. He did not want that for her. He met Eli one more time before Christmas, unexpectedly. He was walking through Grandview Park on a Saturday morning. He walked on Saturday mornings. Always had. It was the one part of the week that belonged to no one, when he heard his name. He turned, and there was Eli in a new jacket that actually fit, with a woman beside him who was thinner than she should have been but standing straight, who had a line between her brows and dark eyes that were the same as her son's. "Mr. Ashford," Eli said. "Ellie," Callum said. There was a pause, the kind that falls between people who have been through something together, but have no script for what comes next. Sable Brennan stepped forward. She was not a person who waited for scripts. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "I know." She stopped, started again. "I know Eli ended up at your building by accident. I know you didn't." Another stop. "I just want you to know that what you did, those calls, the housing advocate, the referral." She pressed her lips together. "No one had to do that. You didn't have to do that." "I was in a position to help," Callum said. "It would have been strange not to." Sable Brennan looked at him for a moment, and she had the expression of someone deciding whether to accept an answer or press on it. She decided to accept it. "Well," she said, "thank you." Eli was looking at Callum with those old, patient eyes. "I got 100 on my math test," he said. "The long division one. I'm not surprised," Callum said. "I was a little surprised," Eli said with complete seriousness, and Callum felt something open in his chest, something that had been closed for a long time, quietly, without his noticing. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that caught him unprepared, and it felt strange in his throat, like a room you have not opened in years and find full of light. The Ashford Family Transition Fund was announced in the first week of January, a $12 million commitment over 5 years, focused specifically on transitional housing for single-parent families in employment transition across Metro Vancouver. Tom Haskell had put the structure together with his usual precision. The board had approved it in a meeting that lasted 40 minutes, which was fast for a board meeting of that size. But Tom had come prepared, and the numbers were solid, and several of the board members, it turned out, had been waiting for Callum to do something like this for a long time. The press release was short, factual, attributed the initiative to a recognition of structural gaps in the city's family housing support system. It did not mention an 11-year-old boy doing long division on a piece of folded paper in a waiting room on a rainy November morning. It did not mention a cracked screen phone with a hummingbird sticker, or a spreadsheet of job applications, or a library book on a clinic bedside table. Those details were not for the press release. They were the kind of thing you carry quietly, the real reason underneath the official reason, the face you actually see when you are sitting in a board meeting approving a budget line. Some things you keep because they are yours. Some things change you so completely, and so specifically that explaining them would diminish them. Callum Ashford kept Eli's face. The serious eyes, the old patience, the small courtesy of thank you, offered to a stranger in a lobby when the stranger had done nothing yet to deserve it. just offered his name and a dry chair and the basic willingness to stop walking. It was such a small thing, he thought, to stop walking, and yet